Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 7 of the Cycle Podcast. I'm really grateful that you are here today listening with us. Really appreciate it. I just had a wonderful conversation with Sharon. She lives in New York City. We actually met via Instagram, and she is going to share her journey with infertility, endometriosis, and pregnancy. I know that this can be a trigger for some women, so please, if it is, this may not be the right podcast for you to listen to, although she does have a very great, heartwarming journey and story and is doing really well now. Thank you again so much for listening. And if this podcast brings you any value or excites you or you want to learn more, please go to my website that's now live. It's melissaboudreau.com, www.melissaboudreau.com. I have some helpful tips about endometriosis on there. I also have a surgery checklist as well as an endo wellness guide that I just made. I'm really excited about it. It's all very new, but I would love for you to check it out and give me your feedback. You can directly message me right from my website if you would like. If you would like to be on the podcast, I'd love to have you. I'm always looking for women who are willing to share their journey to help other women. You can reach out to me through the website. You can also find me on Instagram at MELISBOU or at Endo_lady. Thank you again so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's podcast and you're having the best day that you can, and hopefully you're pain-free. Also, if there's any topics you would like to hear, please let me know. Thank you again so much for listening. Have a great day. Endometriosis. So we don't know each other at all, so I'm very excited to get to know her better and introduce her to all of you. I'm going to let her take it away. Thank you, Sharon, so much for being here. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Melissa. So I'm Sharon. I am 30 years old, live in New York City, and I work as a CPA. In my spare time, I love trying new restaurants, different cuisines, and attending events as a Yelp Elite critic.
Ooh, fun.
Yeah.
Oh, the
I'm a
beauty
big
of
foodie.
living in New York. I'm so jealous. That's so fun. Oh, that's awesome. And you just have so many places to try because you live in the city.
Exactly. I don't think we'll ever leave the city.
No, I wouldn't either if I was there. That's for sure. Okay, well, tell us, obviously a foodie, sounds like you're someone who's on the go, CPA, you're very busy. When did you first find out you had endometriosis, and then we'll kind of backtrack to start from like childhood?
Yeah, absolutely. I found out I had endometriosis in spring of 2018. So a pretty recent diagnosis considering
Okay.
I'm 30 years old now.
Yeah. Yes.
Definitely, I can backtrack for you. I was misdiagnosed in the past.
Yep.
So I began my period at the age of 12.
Yep. That was going to be my first
Yeah.
question. So started your period at 12. How was it? Were you in pain immediately or were you
No,
okay?
I was okay. The only thing is I don't recall ever having a normal 28-day cycle. And initially the doctors thought it was irregular because I was underweight, but even after gaining enough to be in the normal range, it was still very sporadic.
Okay, but
And
no pain.
no
Like it was
pain.
just sporadic.
Right. I don't remember ever experiencing horrible cramps. But
Okay.
because of the fact that it was irregular, they put me on birth control at the age of 17 to regulate them. And I was on the birth control until I was 24. So I think that during that period of time, it really just masked any of the endometriosis symptoms that were really just underlying this whole time.
Sure. So from like 17 to 24, do you feel like you felt totally normal life? Or
Yeah.
now looking back, was there anything weird that maybe now that you know you have it, that maybe there were things where you're like, yeah, I actually had pain down my leg, or I had problems with bowel movements, or anything during that time? Or no, you felt just totally normal from 17 to 24?
I felt completely normal, lived a completely normal life.
Fantastic. That's good.
Yes,
Okay,
I've been
good.
very
So then,
lucky. Yes.
yeah. But then at 24, what happens when you go off the birth control?
Yes. So I came off the birth control. I was having very weird unexplained trips to the doctors. I had fainting, irregular heart rhythms, etc., that couldn't really be explained by anyone. So
Okay.
basically, I came off because I wanted to rid my body of all medications to see if I would improve. And, they did. All those weird issues went away, but I didn't
Okay.
get my period back for about 8 months. And when they did resume, they became extremely irregular, like every 3 months, every 5 months. And when I went to the doctor, I went to the OB at that point, he diagnosed me with lean PCOS because I wasn't overweight.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So are your periods painful when you actually do get them?
So, yes. And I think that I know what brought that on. So, at the age of 26, at this point, this was 2015,
Yeah.
I got breast implants and I moved to
Okay.
New York City after a very messy breakup with a college boyfriend, YOLO at that point in my life.
Yep. 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 Yep.
And
The right age to do
exactly,
it.
especially coming to the city. So,
Yes.
my health actually deteriorated very quickly from there. There was a very
Okay.
strong correlation between getting the implants and what I believe was a triggering of underlying endometriosis, because the implants themselves, as I know it now, are known to be endocrine disruptors. So with
Very
Yes, so
interesting.
within six
Okay.
months of the implants, I noticed that my periods, which were already irregular, became extremely heavy and significantly more painful. And on cycle days 2 and 3, in particular, I basically wasn't a human being. I couldn't do anything at all due to the debilitating pain and the nausea. I would miss
Hmm.
work almost every cycle on those days. So, I mean, I guess it was a good thing I only got my period every other month or so.
Right.
I was also almost always bloated, which was a self-esteem killer during the summer months when, my friends and I would go out in crop tops, and by the end of the night, I would feel like a pig standing next to them. No matter
Right.
how hard I worked out at the gym, just always, always bloated.
Right. And painful too. Like the bloating
Extremely.
hurts.
Yes.
People don't understand that. They're like, oh, water weight, like people who don't have this disease. It's like, no, it actually hurts really bad. You're really distended.
Yes. Very distended, almost like you're pregnant, which I
Yes.
guess leads me to the next part of my journey. So, in mid 2015, I met an amazing guy in New York City who is now my husband. So I guess the bloating wasn't a deal breaker for him. Um,
Nope.
and he is an avid traveler. And I just remember going on so many trips with him around the world. Several of those trips overlapped with my period. I just remember staring at different hotel room walls, curled up in the fetal position and unable to fall asleep because of the terrible nausea and the searing pains that would basically take over my midsection. And
Yeah.
as you know, and as I'm sure a lot of women, unfortunately, with endometriosis know, Tylenol and ibuprofen rarely ever help in those situations.
No, no, especially when you're in the writhing. If you can't get it under control, there's really nothing you can do unless I've gone to the ER before and gotten an IV, and now there's places locally, and I know New York has them, where you can just go get an IV and you can get like a painkiller in it.
Yeah,
And that actually really helps if people are looking for tips. But no, you're right. And especially when you're traveling, you don't know where to go. And if you're out of the country, even scarier.
exactly. Exactly.
And how did your boyfriend slash now husband deal with all of that at the time?
You know, he is a saint. I He was just there to hold my hand. He was there to offer
Oh,
me heating packs. He basically said, if you're not feeling up to it, we don't have to do anything. You can stay in the hotel or we can stay at home. So
yeah.
it's
That's
it's really,
awesome.
I got very lucky, and it's really been, a terrible journey that I'm about to launch into, where I can
Right.
discuss, because basically I dealt with infertility for a long time
Right.
as a consequence of this disease.
Right.
Yeah.
So after, okay, you're traveling, you're in pain. Now what do you do? Do you go back to your GYN and say like something's wrong?
I didn't go right back to the GYN. I do a lot of research online myself and
Okay.
reading up on my symptoms. Everything seemed to match up with a diagnosis of endometriosis. I
Right.
also had, during this time, I developed a consistent throbbing pain on my sides, which I
Mm-hmm.
later learned were endometrioma cysts inside of my
Mm-hmm.
ovaries. And they would
Yes.
hurt when I walked and moved around. They wouldn't
Mm.
necessarily hurt if I laid still. So I just, for a long time, I thought they were muscle related, but
Right.
that didn't, the diagnosis and the revelation of all of this didn't come until later.
Right. Right. Okay. So now what are you doing? You Google it,
Yeah.
you figure out pretty much that it's endo. Are you just like, I'm gonna live with this, or what are your next
Yes,
steps?
so I kind of ignored it for a while because my husband and I got engaged and it was pretty frantic trying to plan a wedding. And so in July 2017, we got married. A few months later, that December, we actually found out I was pregnant naturally. And
That's
we were
amazing.
beyond thrilled. Part of the
Right.
reason we got married so quickly, within 2 years of dating was because we both knew we wanted to start a family together as soon as possible. We
Mm-hmm.
started planning for a baby, everything was looking up. But then in mid-February 2018, so about 10 weeks after we found out we were pregnant, I went in for an ultrasound only to find out that our baby's heartbeat had stopped. So at that point, our world came crashing down. I remember crying for weeks straight and blaming myself,
Yeah.
thinking I shouldn't have gone to spin class or I shouldn't have stayed out so late. I
Right.
I wasn't passing the
I'm so
baby.
sorry.
Thank you so
I'm so
much.
sorry.
Thank you. And unfortunately, I know that many women with endometriosis have to deal with infertility and
Yeah.
fertility complications. And this was just the beginning. This was the iceberg tip. Like I didn't realize at all what this disease can do to your body.
Right. Right.
So I had a DNC, and a couple of weeks later, genetics called and they informed us that our baby had what was called triploidy XXY, which means that he had three full sets of chromosomes. Whereas a normal person is born with 46 chromosomes, our baby had 69. And so therefore it was incompatible with life. And although it can be explained as a spontaneous event where two sperm happen to fertilize one egg at the same time, more likely it was caused by poor egg quality. And that's when I started really diving into the research, partially to distract myself from the devastation of losing our first baby. I was only 28
Sure.
at the time, and so I was
Right.
very confused, like, how is it possible that I had such poor egg quality? So,
Right.
due to
Are
my
you starting
Mhm.
to put it all together at this point? Like,
Exactly.
okay, yeah, like I've had really bad periods lately. And so at
Yeah,
this point, you're starting to do research and figure things out.
exactly. So instead of going back to my OB, I set up an appointment with a reproductive endocrinologist right away. I just wanted answers and I
Right.
wanted
And
some.
your OB
Mhm.
at any time, did they ever mention the word endometriosis? Did you ever
Never,
talk about it? Of course
never
not.
mentioned endometriosis. In fact, after I went in to see him, just to make sure that my HCG levels were down to zero after they had performed the DNC procedure, he
Mm-hmm.
told me that he was going to give me a prescription for Clomid to help me conceive the next round. And what a lot of people don't know about Clomid is that it actually is terrible for someone with
Yeah.
endometriosis.
I don't even know what that is. What is it? Is it a hormone?
So it's a medication that helps you to ovulate, but I think
Got
that the way it
it.
works in women with endometriosis is it actually flares the estrogen levels in their body.
Right, right, right. Because if it's increasing the estrogen and endometriosis is an estrogen dominant disease, it's only
Exactly.
making it worse.
Exactly.
Oh, my goodness.
So my
Okay.
OB
So,
was of zero help.
yeah,
And, he never mentioned endometriosis. He never referred me to a fertility specialist. He was just like, you're
right.
young, try again with Clomid. And somewhere in the back of my head, I just knew I needed more help. And I knew that there
Yeah.
was something underlying that needed to be
Right.
dealt with.
Your intuition just knew.
Exactly. So during
Okay.
my initial consult with the reproductive endocrinologist, he performed a transvaginal ultrasound where he immediately saw the bilateral,
Assists.
the bilateral
Mm-hmm.
endometriosis cysts on both ovaries. And he was the one
Mm-hmm.
who asked me if I had ever been diagnosed with endometriosis, because usually endometriomas indicate at least a stage 3 or a stage 4 severity of the disease.
Yes.
Yes. So he also indicated at that same appointment that my ovarian reserve, based on my antral follicle count, and later on confirmed via an AMH blood test, was extremely low for a 28-year-old. He told me that my reserve was that of someone in her 40s, and that was because the endometriomas were destroying the healthy egg supply in both of my ovaries.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
How did they not know you had those cysts when you were pregnant?
They,
And with your first pregnancy, they
yeah,
never did a transvaginal
they did an
ultrasound. They only
ultrasound and they just called it a normal hemorrhagic cyst or a corpus
wow.
luteum cyst. Yep.
Yeah, so for women who are listening, super important to request, if you do have a cyst, to get a transvaginal ultrasound with hopefully a doctor who understands what an endometrioma is. Because I've had a lot of them myself. I actually lost an ovary due to a very large endometrioma, but also was told it wasn't an endometrioma in the beginning when I was on my journey initially. So just a tip for ladies out there, definitely something to look into, especially if you're trying to get pregnant or having issues getting pregnant.
Yes, absolutely. And if you go to the right person, there's actually a very distinguished appearance of endometriomas on the ultrasound by someone who can recognize them, where they appear
Yes.
as a glassy or a hazy, not necessarily transparent cyst that
Right.
normally occur during your cycle. So it's very important to go to someone who properly knows what it looks like.
Right. We don't know sometimes if people know what it looks like, but asking the questions too. And if the doctor seems like they don't know, it's time to move on and maybe find another doctor.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So now back to where you were. So you find out you have these endometriomas, you have this doctor who understands it. Now, what do you do?
So that day, just remember leaving his office in a panic. And
Yeah.
I mean, I had suspected all along I had endometriosis, but it really wasn't strongly confirmed until then. The worst part of it
Right.
was that it was, impairing my fertility and taking away the one thing that I've always wanted my whole life, and that was to be a mom. So at that
Right.
very point in time, I took action. I researched supplements to take to boost my egg quality, to reduce excess estrogen. I started to eat completely clean. I used safe cleaning products, makeup products. I just overhauled my entire life basically. But
Yep.
most importantly, I read up on the proper way to treat endometriosis, and that's how I came across excision versus ablation, excision being the gold standard. I actually am fortunate enough to live in New York City, so I met with 3 excision specialists, Dr. Orbach, Dr. Vidali, and Dr. Sedgkin.
Okay. But I have one quick question. When you left the endocrinologist, did he tell you need to have the cysts removed? Or what
No,
was his treatment plan?
no. So at that point, they were about 2 centimeters
Okay. So
each.
they wanted to watch and wait. Watch and wait.
Yes. So
Okay.
he told me that it was safe to go ahead with fertility treatments and that
Okay.
at that size, the risks of performing surgery on them were greater than potentially
Right.
the
Because they were
reward.
small.
Exactly.
Okay. Makes sense. And again, I'm not a doctor for the listeners out there, but as I'm sure Sharon's about to tell us, I still think instead of doing fertility treatments first, it's better to try and get rid of the endometriosis first and naturally conceive. But I want to hear your
Yes.
journey because I haven't gone down this path. So I think that this is very helpful for our listeners. So you meet with these 3 amazing specialists that are in New
Yes.
York City. Okay. And then what?
Yes. So then I ultimately decided to go with Dr. Sedgkin because of the nature of my disease had seemed to be at least a stage 3 or stage 4 at that point, and this was later on confirmed via MRI as well. But I decided to go with Dr. Sedgkin just because of his number of years of experience. But during this time, I also came across the idea that the 2 foreign objects in my body, the 2 bags of saline breast implants, could have triggered an immune response in my body that caused my dormant endometriosis to flare up when I had the
Yes.
surgery to put them in.
Right.
So, and in my mind, I couldn't shake the fact that the toxicity of the implant materials could also be wreaking havoc on my fertility. It was
Yes.
absolutely a no-brainer for me. I scheduled surgery with a plastic surgeon for them to be removed a month before my surgery with Dr. Sedgkin. So
Wow.
before this all happened, I
Oh my
pursued a
goodness.
very aggressive plan to move forward with back-to-back IVF cycles in order to bank embryos. And only because they told me that my ovarian reserve was very much dwindling.
Low.
Exactly.
Sure. Sure. Sure.
Yes.
Okay. Wow. So this was a very intense, you have multiple things going on and crazy intense. And this was last year,
This was all
2018.
last year. Yes.
Wow. You are a hero.
It's
Oh
been
my
a hell of a
goodness.
year.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So at the
Okay.
time when I was going through IVF, I was convinced, irrationally looking back now, that I was going to run out of eggs. Um, and the way that IVF works is that you inject yourself daily with hormones to stimulate all of your eggs at once to allow for retrieval of all of them instead of just one in a natural cycle.
Right.
But due to the stimulation, the estrogen levels are many times higher than they would be in a normal cycle. I knew going into the IVF process that the extremely high estrogen levels would be bad for the endo because endometriosis feeds off of this hormone, but
Right.
the potential to create embryos that could result in a healthy baby was far more important to me. So
Right.
I
Okay.
underwent 3 IVF cycles between the time span of April through July. And in the meantime, my endometriosis symptoms flared like crazy. My
Yeah.
endometrioma cysts became so large that I had to stop all exercise to avoid risk of them bursting. For the first time in my life, sex became painful in any position. I had shooting pains up and down my rectum before a bowel movement. The pain was so blinding that I had to sometimes, grip the edge of a table to stabilize myself to keep from falling.
Right.
I
Oh my
tried
goodness.
acupuncture, Chinese herbal medicine to help alleviate the pain. I tried turmeric, fish oils, any other anti-inflammatories that I could find on the internet.
Right. Right. Did it help?
I would say turmeric and fish oil, that combination did bring me some relief. But
Okay.
one of the major things that did have a very clear impact on my period pains during that time was actually trying out the ketogenic diet, which is
Okay.
very anti-inflammatory in nature. And for those of you who aren't aware, basically it's a very low carb, high
Right.
protein diet, um, high fat diet. And
Mm-hmm.
although many of us have heard that there's a diet best for endometriosis based on vegetables, fruit, and low in dairy and red meats, this is actually quite the opposite. So,
Right. Right. You know what? I think people talk about diet all the
yes,
time. I think it depends on the person, and you have to test to see what works best for you. I think every diet has its benefits, and for some women and some it doesn't. Like I don't do any dairy or gluten because I'm allergic, but as soon as I was diagnosed with endometriosis, I had cut those things out anyway, and it really did help me personally.
yes,
But I know other women who it doesn't, and I know some women who can't tolerate grains at all, so they do the strict paleo diet. So if you're struggling with your diet, the best way to do it is keep a diary, keep a journal, write down everything you eat and how it makes you feel for 30 days and take things out, add things back in. That's really the best way to figure out what works best for you, because I do believe that it's different for everyone.
Yes, just
I've
like
heard paleos
endometriosis attacks
is
everyone
different. Yeah,
differently.
it's right, exactly. And that's honestly one of the reasons why I want to do this podcast and hear so many different stories, because endometriosis impacts women in such different ways that it's very hard to find. I mean, there's similar symptoms, but it's very hard to figure out how what works for one person doesn't work for the other. And it's very interesting to me.
Yes.
So, yes. So, okay. So you found some of these natural ways. I also am very similar to you. I don't like narcotics or prescriptions. I try to do everything as natural as possible, especially when you have a chronic illness.
Yeah.
Your body can't handle taking all of those pharmaceutical drugs, and finding natural ways really does help. And I don't judge anyone. I mean, do what you need to do to get through the pain. But personally, I found that finding a natural regimen has really helped me as well.
Absolutely. I'm not
So,
currently continuing to take the drug still, but I know that during that period of time when my pain was at an absolute high, a combination of any of those drugs was definitely helping. Definitely
right,
helping.
right. So you're doing this IVF, and when did you plan after you saw Dr. Sechkin, was he like, yes, you need to have surgery?
Yes.
Did you come up with this plan? Like, okay, I'm going to have my breast implants removed. I'm going to do this IVF, and then we're going to have surgery?
My plan was to do IVF first to bank all the
Okay.
embryos and not transfer
Okay.
any of them, then have my breast
Yes.
implants removed, and then have surgery with Dr. Sechkin. And that's exactly what I did.
Wow.
Yes.
Right. So you're suffering with all of this crazy, like, endometriosis flare, but then after you're done with the IVF, do you start to feel a little bit better as your hormones went down?
No, I
No,
think
because it was
that,
flare. You were in
yeah,
a full flare up.
full
Yeah.
flare, full on flare.
Yeah.
Yes.
Poor thing. Oh my
Before my
goodness.
surgery with Dr. Sechkin, he sent me for an MRI, and it showed at that point that my endometriosis had grown onto both of my fallopian tubes and had blocked them. Whereas, just several months earlier, I had an HSG as part of my fertility workup, which showed my tubes were completely open before I started IVF.
Oh, wow. I
Yes.
mean, that if that doesn't go to show you right there that it's an estrogen dominant disease, I don't know what does.
Incredibly estrogen dominant. Yes. So
Wow. Okay.
when, Dr. Sechkin went over the MRI results with me, I was just in such a dark place at that time because,
I'm
the
sure.
thought of losing both my tubes, the chances of
Yeah.
a natural conception would be impossible.
Right. 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 Oh my goodness. So what happens now?
Yes,
You plan your surgery with him.
yes. So in
Good.
September, I had a 4-hour excision surgery with Dr. Sechkin where he found and removed lesions from my tubes, my colon, appendix, bladder, cul-de-sac, and of course my ovaries. Both of my ovaries were engulfed with huge endometriomas at that point. I want to say they were about 6 or 7 centimeters each. And they
Wow.
had to be taken apart. My ovaries had to be taken apart, reconstructed with sutures. Recovery honestly sucked. I live in a fifth floor walk-up building in New York City, and I was
Oh,
basically housebound for
yeah,
half a
because you
month.
weren't walking down those
Yep,
five. Oh my goodness.
absolutely
Uh,
not. But
did you feel when you woke up from the
yeah,
surgery though, did you feel different? Like almost lighter?
I did. And I think a lot of
Like in
that
your
was,
abdomen?
not necessarily in my
Okay.
abdomen. I think most of this was mentally feeling as though
Hmm.
I am doing the right things. And I always
Right.
had
And you were
that long-term
justified.
goal in my head. Yes,
Yeah. Right. And you were justified because they found endo everywhere.
everywhere. Yes.
Were you stage 4 at that time or
He
stage 3?
he deemed me as a stage 3 at that
Okay.
time. Yes.
Okay. Wow. And then, yeah, you have to recover from both of these surgeries.
Yes.
Oh my
My
goodness.
work was not so thrilled that I was gone for quite a long
Yeah.
time at once.
How long did you take? Did you take 12 weeks?
No, so I actually had the flexibility of working from home. So after
Okay.
I had my breast implants removed, I was back online within 3 days. And after the endometriosis surgery, I was back online within a week and a half.
Oh, oh boy.
Yeah.
That is a lot. That's a lot. But oh my
But,
goodness. Okay.
I knew that
So,
cleaning up my body of the toxins
yes.
and the endometriosis would give me the best shot at having a healthy baby. And I kept just
Yeah.
kind of repeating this mantra in my head every time I looked in the mirror because I saw all these scars on my abdomen, scars under my deflated boobs. Just
Yeah.
definitely did a number on my self-esteem for sure.
I can only imagine. And you are a hero. I mean, that is a lot to go through in 1 year. A lot. And you're just newly married.
Newly married, which brings me to the point we had talked about earlier about my husband just being an absolute saint and supporting me this whole time by my side, telling me we would do whatever it took and that I was making all the right decisions.
Oh, what a sweetheart. That's good.
Yes,
That is exactly what you needed.
absolutely.
Good. So now, okay, your recovery, how was your recovery? Obviously, fifth floor walk up took you a couple months to feel better.
Yes.
But when did you start to feel like, you know what?
Back to
I made
normal?
all of, yeah.
Yeah, I would say so. I had my surgery at the end of September for the endometriosis. I would say probably by
Okay.
beginning of November, I felt pretty much 95% back to myself.
Good. That's awesome. And how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. So, in January 2019, we actually had our first embryo transfer.
Okay.
Dr. Reichman at Weill Cornell transferred an untested embryo into my uterus, and a week later, I had a positive beta HCG test. I was pregnant again, and I knew in that moment, as terrified as I was of another miscarriage, that everything we had gone through in 2018 was for a reason. I am thrilled, but still cautiously optimistic to say that we are currently 24 weeks along with a healthy baby boy due in October.
Oh, congratulations. That's awesome.
Thank
And how
you.
are you feeling? Like, do you feel, I mean,
It
do you
feels
feel good?
wonderful not having a period. Yes, I feel amazing. I don't have cramping. I think that a lot of doctors they tell women with endometriosis that pregnancy is a cure, which I don't agree with. But there
No.
is logic in that when you're pregnant, you have high levels of progesterone in your body, which a lot of the time does calm down your endometriosis symptoms because it counteracts the estrogen.
Right, right. I mean, how were your periods leading up to before you got pregnant? I mean, I know the first like four after
Oh
excision
gosh.
surgery are rough. They're very rough because you're still healing.
Yes.
But were you able to have, you probably had only like one or two before you got pregnant. Did Were they better?
So I would say the first one was okay. And I was
Okay.
mistakenly thinking, oh, wow, well, maybe the first surgery or the first period after surgery, horrible period that everybody talks about. Like maybe I just missed that boat entirely.
Right.
But my second period after surgery, it was horrendous, absolutely
Yeah.
horrendous. And again, we were traveling at that time overseas, and
Oh,
uh,
of course.
oh my gosh, in that hotel room, just completely staring at the ceiling, could not sleep, couldn't even, it felt like I couldn't even breathe. It was that painful.
Yeah.
But beyond that, I think I had maybe one more period after that
Okay.
surgery, and it was much better than the second one.
Good. Good.
Yes,
Good. Well, I'm so excited that you're pregnant. Congratulations. That is great. And I'm glad that you're feeling good too.
thank you.
That's wonderful. Okay, well, really appreciate your story. Is there anything else you want to add or recommend that has really worked for you? Either, like you said, natural cleaners,
Yes,
anything that you thought, like, I really wish I knew this. There's so many women listening to this podcast that don't even know they have endometriosis, or they've just been diagnosed, they've never had an opportunity to have surgery. So any recommendations or advice based on your journey that you can give them?
Sure. So firstly, I would consider your exposure to any potential endocrine disruptors. In my case, it was the breast implants I had in my body. Obviously, some implants you must have because they're medically necessary. But if you happen to have something that's not necessarily medically necessary, I would suggest you look into the potential health risks of keeping those in your body in the long term.
Right.
I also mentioned my period pains were significantly reduced when I tried out the keto diet for about 4 months. Again, as Melissa mentioned, every diet may not work for every woman, but I do believe that going low carb, low gluten in general does help. So whether or not you choose to incorporate the dairy or to restrict the dairy on its own and other aspects of that diet, that's totally up to you. But I think that the major factor is carbohydrates.
Yeah. Grains.
Yes.
Grains too, like fruit. Some fruits, some women are totally fine with, but I do think we have a hard time digesting food because of the inflammation in our abdomens.
Yes. I also
Yes.
noticed my
Okay.
bloating was significantly reduced on a low carb diet.
Yes. Yep. I noticed that when I did paleo.
Yeah.
It was much less bloated, and I was eating no grains.
Right.
So it really, but it's really hard to maintain. Very hard to maintain.
Extremely.
So it's got to be real life and something you can maintain the best you can.
Yeah, something that's sustainable, because unfortunately endometriosis is a chronic disease.
Yes. Yes. And that is something, unfortunately, that I have had a hard time grasping, because I continuously just think, oh, I'll have the surgery and I'll be fine. But it is a chronic illness, and you do have to manage it. Like someone with diabetes has to manage diabetes. It is something that you'll have to manage for the rest of your life.
Yes.
So, well, thank you so much. Any other tips or tricks or anything else you want to add before we end?
Well, I just want to thank you, Melissa, for creating this podcast as a medium for other women to hear us and realize that they are never alone. Endometriosis is an absolutely terrible disease that needs more awareness and research funding, but more importantly, in my opinion, needs channels such as yours to provide light and hope to women who are suffering both physically and emotionally. So thank you so much for having me.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for the kind words, and thank you for sharing your story and your time with us today. It really means a lot. And just for the women listening, I just want to echo what Sharon said. You are not alone. I know a lot of people feel alone, but there's 200 million of us. And I see this quote on the internet all the time, but it says, the worst club with the best people. And I couldn't agree with that more. So we are a community of people that just want to help and support each other. And my ultimate goal is just to raise awareness.
Yes.
So Sharon, thank you so much for your time and your story. I hope you have a great rest of your day. And to all of our listeners, thank you so much for your time as well.
Thank you, Melissa.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you again, everyone, for listening. I hope you enjoyed this month's podcast with Sharon and her story, and we're so grateful that she was on. Thank you again, Sharon, for being with us. If you would like to reach out and be on the podcast, please go to my website, www.melissaboudreau.com, to find out more information, or send me a message and we will chat to see if we can get you on. And also, if you enjoyed this podcast, if it brought you any value, please give us whatever recommendation or rating you would like to give us in the iTunes store. It means so much. It helps me get visibility, getting the word out there. And really my passion at the end of every day is just bringing awareness to endometriosis and helping women. If there's a topic you would like to see, please let me know. You can go ahead and message me on my website. I would really appreciate it. Thank you again so much for listening. I hope you're feeling well. Take care.
The podcast you just heard was made using Anchor. Ever thought about making your own podcast? Anchor makes it really easy for anyone to get started. It's a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing podcasts. Best of all, it's 100% free. Sign up now at anchor.fm/new. That's anchor.fm/new to get started.